G'day guys, it's Benjamin Morgan, the Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and I welcome you to our Facebook Live session here at Morrabbin Airport. This evening we're going to be catching up with business owners, stakeholders, aircraft owners and pilots, people who are passionate about aviation but are facing an uncertain future with the release of the 2021 Masterplan that now puts into question exactly how much aviation space will be left here at this airport and how much non-aviation development we'll be looking at towards the future. Tonight's conversation is all about bringing those voices to the fore and allowing them to speak in their own words so that you can understand their feelings on this particular issue. Now, joining us this evening for this conversation is none other than Sean Runacres, and Sean's sitting right next to me this evening. Even though he's appearing in this screen beside me, he's actually right beside me here at the deck bar. Can you see his hand? G'day, Sean, and welcome back. Yeah, and I'm also joined this evening by none other than the AOPA Director, Dr. David Hook. Welcome, David, to Facebook Live.
Thank you.
Okay, let's cut into things straight away. So we have a room full of people here. Everyone's smiling, which is good news. Are we all smiling? Okay, first person we're going to have a chat to this evening is going to be James McDonald. And James, what I might do is just get you to jump up and we'll run around. I've had a little bit to do with James over the years with AOPA and have worked with him in putting together the General Aviation Summit, which was held in Wagga. And the purpose of that summit was to discuss issues facing the aviation industry at the time, with the specific topic being the review and changes to the Civil Aviation Act. And that summit was quite successful in getting the government to move forward in making a change. Probably the changes didn't go far enough as what we needed as an industry, but it did signify that when the industry came together on these important issues that we could get the government to move. So we welcome James here with us this evening. I'll just turn this around, James. G'day, how are you?
Good evening.
Okay, so I'm going to pop my head out of this and put you right in the frame, but why don't we kick off first of all, maybe give us a bit of an overview of your involvement here at Morrabbin with aviation, a bit of your aviation background, and then we'll have a discussion about what's impacting the industry.
Okay, so I'm a B2 Lamey, as well as my brother. I'm an instrument-rated pilot. We've owned several aircraft operated on Morrabbin Airport. The business has been based on Morrabbin Airport for in excess of 25 years. We employ 10 people. I'd say it's about the fourth largest avionics shop independent avionics shop in the country. And up until now, we've operated on Morrabbin out of several facilities, and the one we're in now is slated to go under the next master plan.
So I guess just to roll back a little bit, as an avionics company working with aircraft owners, working with pilots, working with aviation businesses, I mean, how critical is it that your services be available at an airport?
Yeah, pretty critical. We most probably have more itinerant customers at Morrabbin Airport than any other business. And, we talk about not only infrastructure problems at the airport, how about charging problems? The landing fees at this airport have gone through the roof in the last 3 years, to the point now where customers that used to come in and get work done at Morrabbin actually state, no, I'm not going to come, I don't want to pay $140 to land my Baron there. This is it's almost a daily conversation. So we're also being forced to move to other airports to keep work moving.
Okay, well let's roll back a couple of steps. So as an avionics business, you're fitting equipment to aircraft. The types of aircraft that you're working on from here would be what types of aircraft?
Oh, anything from Tiger Moths to corporate jets.
So general aviation aircraft. You're not working on airliners, but you're working on general aviation airplanes all the way up to business class jets and the like. And so obviously airports like Morrabbin Airport are quite critical because within the Melbourne metropolitan area, we don't exactly have a multitude of airports. We have a very limited number of airports that people can come to access business services and activities. Services and activities are obviously creating jobs, specialised technical and trade jobs. I mean, how important is this?
Oh, it's very important because if you look at the structure of a business, in our case, you can't support a business that employs 10 people without a large volume of aircraft and the more expensive type of aeroplanes. Say, for instance, like Tyre Airport, which we do a fair bit of work at, you can't land a King Air. So you're limited to, say, a cheap and large twin. Now, yeah, you could have a business at Tyre, but it's only going to be not a hobby business, but maybe one or two people. That's it. There isn't the number of aircraft to support a substantial business. Lilydale's the same boat. You know, Lilydale's got quite a few aircraft, really no commercial operations at all, apart from Lilydale's own commercial operation. So again, limited to the structure of a business, especially when the business is so specific like we are. You know, avionics isn't something that blends out into a lot of different things. A lot of avionics shops of recent years have been forced to go into engine airframe stuff. We still don't. We actually share our hangar with an engine airframe, you know, company, and that combination has worked very, very well for many, many years. So you're not talking about displacing one company. You're talking about displacing. There's actually 4 companies that use our hangar. Most probably a total of in excess of 30 people. And currently on this airport, with their 2021 master plan, there is nowhere left that they can build a facility that can house what we have. The actual square footage that we have now cannot be repeated again with their development. Even though they state they will allow us to, you know, build a new hangar. And just as a matter of interest, there still hasn't been one new aviation facility built on this airport yet.
Well, I had the chance today, James, to drive around the airport, and I've said this in an earlier broadcast. I'm really disappointed, and in some ways I'm shocked, and in other ways I'm actually not too shocked that when you drive around and you look at the structures, you see aviation buildings and infrastructure that's in dire need of investment, in dire need of improvement. I mean, the general look and feel of the buildings is one that looks reasonably depressive. It looks like it's all from the 1940s or the 1950s, and there are some outliers. There are some buildings here that look like they're far more modern, but we generally have an airport here that looks like it's the same principal structures from wartime, from the wartime years, or possibly the 1950s and the 1960s. So there's a wonderful Beechcraft hangar up there that has half the Beechcraft logo hanging on the awning.
Fell on one of our cars, actually.
And so it's horrible look, but if we just go another 250 yards down the road, what we see is a commercial industrial development which is now being put in place and constructed by the airport management here and the airport owners, being Goodmans, and it clearly involves several $100 million worth of development. I know they've tried to probably argue that it's far less, but it really does appear that there is a substantive development going on, and that seems to be the focus. I mean, is that your impression?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In the long run, when you talk tenure of business, like you decide to set up a business somewhere, you have a tenure of business. Currently, we have none. There's no one going to invest in this airport in an aviation sense, because basically we've almost got a 6-month lease hanging over our head because of their development clause.
So what we're saying there, and I guess for some of the senators that are going to have the opportunity to look at these videos, or this particular broadcast later on, I'm going to be in Canberra tomorrow. We're meeting with Anthony Albanese's office and a number of senators. When we talk about tenure here at the airport, we're talking about the leases. So as a commercial business, you go to the airport owner, the airport management, and you request a lease to be able to set your business up. You can't buy the land here.
No.
Because the airport is a Commonwealth leased airport, and it's being managed by this private company, a property developer that masquerades as an airport company. And you have a lease, and that lease gives you a period of time. And back under the Federal Airports Corporation management days, it was not uncommon to get a 25-year lease with a 25-year rollover, and those leases were put in place to encourage businesses to make large capital investments into these sites. And that's where all these buildings come from. And I'm sure if we walk around and we have a look at a lot of these structures, we'll find many of these structures were originally built on FAC 25-year leases. And then post-privatisation, these leases were handed over to these private companies through this process of resumption. And these private companies have taken those buildings, and in the process of taking the buildings, those buildings have then increased the landhold values even further, which have then justified the airport management's asking even higher leasehold rates on these properties. And so today, instead of getting a 25-year lease, what kind of lease term are you able to access?
Right now, no. How long have we been trying to get a lease put under our thing now?
5 years.
So we're on a month-by-month lease, which is a continuation of an old lease, and the ability for you to talk to anyone in MAC is almost zero.
I've heard a lot of AOPA members who've contacted me over the last 3 years, and it reminds me of a group of three who were trying to build a new building for two principal reasons. The first one was they'd all bought new aircraft and they'd like someone to park their aircraft, and those airplanes were being used for business. And let's face it, that's a great thing. And for a lot of people who don't understand, when you buy a business aircraft and you put it into the aviation ecosystem, that business aircraft is now contributing maintenance hours, it's contributing fuel consumption hours, it's contributing flying hours. So in a lot of cases, two of those pilots actually had commercial pilots working for their companies to fly them around. So it's creating jobs at every level of the system. So, we want to see more of that. And I think the government would want to see more of that. But
Absolutely.
These people were virtually steered away after what became a protracted year and a half of negotiations that ended with nothing. I mean, they literally walked away at the end of that process with nothing to show for the year and a half of negotiation.
Yes. Well, we had the same scenario. We had a 58 Baron, and that aeroplane was hangared in Hangar 3. For quite a period of time, that lease was held by a guy that we work for. He had jets. He had an argument with MAC and handed that lease back to MAC, the Hangar 3 lease. We commenced negotiations to take on the lease of that hangar for the 7 aeroplanes that were hangared in there. Up until 4 weeks before the end of June in 2017, I think it was, we were still in negotiations. On the 30th of June, we got eviction notices for all 7 aeroplanes.
And it's strange when we contrast these stories, well, they're not stories, they're factual accounts. These factual accounts against what we see, and that is clearly non-aviation businesses are not having difficulty negotiating with this airport for industrial and commercial sites, and clearly the airport is very motivated to build brand new buildings, as we've seen. I mean, I've got this staggering map that I was showing one of the senators only last week, and I overlaid it with a shot of the 1980s, and I showed them the difference between the site in the 1980s and the site today, and I said, and isn't it astounding that all of what we see that has been lost, none of it's for aviation, not one bit of it. And I think the master plan was saying 168 hectares of non-aviation development since privatisation, and an actual reduction in aviation land space for the aviation industry. And yet, in that same time, we hear of all these businesses and yourself, and I see others that are nodding here this evening as you're talking about this issue. Clearly there's demand. Clearly the aviation industry wants access to this land to be able to build aviation facilities. We want to build success. We want to create those jobs. But there's just no one at MAC that appears to be listening.
No, and on a business basis, you've got to look at, okay, you want to build a facility. So what do? You're going to go to the bank and you're going to seek a loan to build your facility. Well, no bank in creation is going to give you a loan to build anything on these government airports the way they've been operating. So you can't build a facility. We, at one point, were looking at the last parcel of land down here on Bundura Parade, which is further down to the south of the airport. That is now commercial development, and that is the last piece of land that had any decent footprint that could have airside access. Other than that, there is little pockets where they're saying, oh, we'll build a hangar here or build that there. Now, nothing's happened, but when you're talking about replacing 7,000 square feet with 3,000 square feet, how does that work?
So, James, if we pull back and we shoot a really wide frame on this, and I ask you the question, do you believe aviation has grown at this site
Absolutely
since
not.
privatisation, or is it contracted?
No, absolutely not.
So have we lost jobs? I mean, is the aviation industry here today employing fewer people than what it was at the time of privatisation?
I'd say yes now, because the number of companies that operate on this airport are definitely a fair number less.
And I'd like the next question that has to be asked into that, because I know it'll be a question that I get asked straight away, and that is, well, is that reduction, though, a consequence of ageing aircraft?
No.
Is the reduction a consequence of there's just no demand in the industry?
The demand is very interesting, because you've got to take the onset of RAOs and LSAs into account, and Soar Aviation. A classic example, Soar Aviation, they bitumised the back of Hangar 3 for a company that was insolvently trading. And the reason that Soar kept going, from my point of view, is simply to boost the movement numbers at this airport. It'll be very interesting to do a movement number figure on this airport now, and bearing in mind that a lot of the movements are taken by the flying schools. So while we've got CAE operating here, the movements obviously in that training school are very high. If you broke it down to general aviation movements and private flying operations out here, it'd be vastly different.
Well, an issue, James, that you and I have had plenty of conversation around, and it's a discussion that we're continuing to have with infrastructure, is a conversation that centres on the lack of apprenticeships, the lack of training of young people now that want to be involved in the industry. What impact do you feel privatisation has had on the industry's capacity to bring young people in? Has privatisation played a role in creating a divide there, in saying we no longer have the facilities, we no longer have the businesses, we just can't do this?
It's a very interesting industry in terms of trying to attract young people into it, because from the engineering point of view, a lot of people want to be pilots, and we are having basically two pilot training strains now. You either go through a CAE and you go on to be a commercial airline pilot. Most of those pilots will never fly GA aeroplanes ever again. Whereas the old school pilots come through, they went through the flying schools, they flew GA, they own GA aeroplanes moving forward. Those type of commercial pilots are very rare these days. So it's very hard for us as engineers to attract younger generations, because it's a harder job, there's no doubt about it. It doesn't have a lot of, but you've also got to have a business that moves forward, and it's very hard to move forward in this environment. Hence, to attract more people.
If your businesses are facing an environment where there's less space and they're asking higher prices for the space that is available, and this is driving up the cost of operation, this has to be borne out in some capacity, with businesses no longer being able to afford to make the investment into the education and training that's needed to keep the industry going. So would you agree that it is that is having an impact?
Yeah, it is having an impact. Yeah, just the whole industry, in terms of privatisation, is not a very good model, is the best way to put it. We get compared a lot with the FAA. Now, the FAA model may have its flaws, but it works. And you look at GA in the United States throughout COVID, it's going through the roof. You've seen some of the avionics reports that AEA does about funding and things. I got another one today, I can't quote the figures off that one. But you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of input of value into the US economy from general aviation.
Yeah. I have quite a few friends, and we have a director of AOPA who's based in the US, and I love catching up with Mike, because it's almost the diametric opposite of a conversation with people here in Australia, where I'll talk to someone in Australia, they talk about the struggles and the challenge and everything that's going on, and Mike's like, Cessna just gave us a brand new 172 to use free of charge for the next 6 months. My flight school's going gangbusters. I've had to put all these extra staff on. I've got, I'm bringing in these interesting airplanes. I'm like, Mike, are we on the same planet? Get this, and Mike's just all the time saying, Ben, Australia would be doing this if it simply would adopt a framework that enabled that success to occur. So it's almost like Australia just wants to run around with the ball and chain and the shackles on for the sake of it. So it's something to feel. There's plenty of other people that I need to get to this evening. Don't run just yet, because I've got another couple of questions which I think are critical. Quite often in these conversations, the industry is dismissed when we raise these concerns. It's just, it's AOPA having a whinge. It's Ben trying to make a little bit of noise. He wants to sell a few memberships. I mean, is this issue real?
No, I don't think so. I think the industry over...
The issue of privatisation facing the Moorabbin Airport community
Oh, it's
and the
absolutely
impact
real.
and damages to it, is it real?
Yeah, absolutely real. Yeah.
And James, you came along to our General Aviation Summit. You were there
Yes.
not only as a strong supporter of aviation, but you're also there in full support of the avionics industry.
Mhm.
And you've had not only a background of being involved in aviation, but your business was also involved in pioneering leading technology.
Yes.
And going through that painful subject, and I won't bring it up other than to say you've contributed a great deal in your time in aviation. If you had the opportunity to sit in front of the Deputy Prime Minister right now, what message would you give him?
The government needs to take an interest in the industry. They need to be more involved. I mean, what's happening here at Moorabbin Airport is a classic. The government's looking that way, and a private company who are a property developer are doing what they do. You can't blame Goodman for doing what they're doing. They've been given a goose that's laying a golden egg, and they're using it because the government's not doing anything to oversight what they're doing. And as you said, little companies like us cannot take on a $50 billion capitalised company. You know, it's just not going to happen. It's got to be a government involvement.
So the master plan as it sits today, would you be asking for the master plan to be stopped in its tracks, reviewed? What outcome would you like to see from that?
I think from a point of view, yeah, the master plan not only has to be stopped in its tracks, but the building has to be stopped in its tracks. The actual implementing of phase 2, 3 and whatever phases they've got in their mind, which, you know, we've actually just looked this afternoon at the master plan from 2010, 2015 and 2021. When you look at those three, one after the other, you go, holy golly, how did this happen? Which is what's going to happen with this master plan, for sure. It's there in spirit for them, but it's not going to be what happens in the long run.
All right, well, James, I thank you very much for joining us here this evening. It's really good feedback, and hopefully those that get the opportunity to watch through the video can see and understand that these are not just some esoteric issues, are real and meaningful issues that are impacting aviation here at Moorabbin. And what I hope we'll be inviting the Senate RRAT to come to Moorabbin. We'd like to see them come down and take a tour of this facility. I'd love them to be able to meet you face to face. I'm sure that they would very much enjoy the experience as well, because there's nothing better on these issues than to get in front of the people it genuinely impacts, to be able to understand the challenges. So thank you for your words today.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks for all your help.
Thanks a lot. Okay, next person I'm going to ask to come up is going to be Rob. We've got Rob Simpson here, who is the president of the Moorabbin Airport Chamber of Commerce, or is it chairman? Presidente?
Yes.
Head honcho, the man himself. And Rob's also has an aviation business here involved in aircraft maintenance, is it?
Yes.
And so he's well versed on what's been going on, and also you've got buildings that were directly impacted.
Yes.
That has a really interesting role with MACC in bringing together the community on this issue. And I think, you know, Rob, before I hand it over, it's probably one of the great things that I've seen over the last 12 months has been, as a result of issues at TIAB, as a result of issues in other locations, aviation communities are actually starting to come together on these important topics and are working together and standing with one another. And I think it's really, really critical, because the only way that we actually can successfully respond is when everyone's actually standing right with one another. So I think that's a great thing. But thank you for joining us. So
Not a problem. Thank you for coming down. Really appreciate it.
So maybe the best thing to do is give us a rundown of your involvement here at the airport, your background, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the master plan.
The background, it's actually an interesting day because today is the 11th of May. It was 43 years ago I moved from New South Wales down to Victoria to start on this airport. I'd been running my own company, Simpson Electrics, for the past 37 years. Our building was one of the ones that was taken away from us, supposedly in the 2015 master plan. Somehow we managed to miss that point. But I've run a MRO here at Moorabbin, B1, B2 licensed. Originally started off as being electrical instrument, went into the radio side of things due to downturn of availability of staff over the years, then decided to get airframe licensed, then engine licensed, and basically now we can look after everything that we need to look after in-house. But as I said, I've been running the company here on the airport for 37 years. And we've seen some changes.
I was just about to say, I'm sure during that span you will have seen some real dynamic change at the airport. What's your general feeling? I mean, has that been changed for the better or has it changed for the worse?
Both, definitely. The reason why I say both is it was a very interesting thing. One of the things that happened during the cleanup of when we had to move out of the hangar that was demolished, we found all the old advertising from Aviation Trade Up. And there was a list of all the companies on Moorabbin Airport with photos of the companies on Moorabbin Airport and advertising, general blurbs, whatever. I showed it to Linton up at Aircraft Props and Spares. And he said, do you realise at that point in time, there was 33 engine shops on the airport?
Wow, 33.
Now, that was because every company that you went to did their own engines. So it didn't matter where you went on the airport, you could get engine work done. Out of that now, there's not even 33 companies on the airport.
Is there 33 engineers on the airport?
I'd throw that open to the group and say,
No,
I don't think there would be. And like, let's look at the licensed engineer side of things. James would attest to this as much as I would. Training at this point in time, getting people into the industry, getting people trained up.
I'm going to throw a little statistic in there too, because the reason I'm going to throw this in, I want to remind myself of my meeting tomorrow. The aircraft registrations database actually over the last 30 years has increased. Now, understand that for a moment. If the number of aircraft registered on the Australian registration system has increased across the last 30 years, but the number of maintainers and companies able to work on those aeroplanes has decreased, there's something going wrong, isn't there?
But yeah, I mean, you look at it across the board for the way that it's gone with, and a lot of it has been with privatisation. I know a friend of mine that used to work with me at Shuts many years ago, Tony Brand. He's a large stalwart with tracking down information and whatever. If you start looking at, I know that he's banging on a lot about this with flying training and school clubs in various regional airports. He said, I think there's now 2, maybe 3 flying clubs in Victoria.
It's crazy. I've spent 5 years travelling around Australia with AOPA and going to engagements from one end of the place to the next. And I keep raising it every time I meet with the government. I meet with CASA saying, if you are actually out there and you're visiting regional Australia and country Australia and you're actually taking the time to do that, then it is impossible for you to argue that our aviation industry is healthy. There's something is really going wrong that's causing such significant decline. And you consider the distances that separate this country.
This is one of the things that you look at it, where you say, okay, how do you get around Victoria? I mean, if you look at, I was just talking to a mate of mine that actually operates out of England, and he said that they look at that being that's a big thing. If you go from one end of England to the other, go flying. You look at it.
It's a pretty small country.
That's an afternoon trip for us.
Yeah.
And it's nothing out of the ordinary. Yet you go to an airport now and you pray that the power supply is still there for the fuel bowser, because there's no one else there. There's no one in the hangars. The hangars are locked up. Everything's locked up. And that's what's going to happen here shortly if we continue to allow what's going on now. They're going to come here and there's going to be a credit card swipe for the bowser and there'll be no one here.
So I've noticed in driving around today, and you've probably heard me already say this, that it's really disappointing to see the condition of a lot of the buildings, and that's certainly not a reflection on the operators who are leasing these facilities.
Okay, let's look at that exact point where you say it's not a reflection of the operators. In one sense, yes, it is, but bear with me for a moment. How much money do we have to then put into something we may not even own?
Correct.
How much money have we got left over from complying with regulatory sides of things, complying with taxation sides of things, keeping ourselves alive, keeping ourselves afloat? Oh, let's go outside and do the nature strip. 1, we don't have time. 2, we don't have the funds. And by the time that the end of the day's over, we probably don't even have the inclination either, because we're just tired. That's one of the big problems that we've got. Not saying that it's our fault, not saying that, we've got to look at that and say, well, we need to drag ourselves up by the bootstraps. We've run out of time. And we're getting no support from anywhere, no support from anyone to actually do something about it. Drive around this airport and have a look at what the place looks like, which I think you said before you did today. The hangar that was taken from me earlier this year was a privately constructed hangar. I purchased it from an administrator because the previous company that was in there were not liquid at that point in time. So they sold the building to me. That was, by the time that it was demolished, it was a 30-year-old building. The hangar that I moved into, at last look, they actually don't know when it was built, but they believe that it was 1954. And that's beautifully contained in the master plan as one of the hangars that was converted from a split-use hangar to a full-use hangar that I paid to actually convert it back to that.
It's just a crazy situation. Jumping to the master plan itself, this is obviously a continuation now of other master plans.
Yep.
I attended the meeting here 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And I know the Chamber's bringing everybody together to go through this document in detail, which is critical in trying to understand each and every argument that this poses against our industry, and also to be able to put that in front of government. I mean, how much faith do you put in these master planning processes now that you've now seen this one?
None.
You've been through the previous?
I don't know whether everybody is actually seeing the master plan, and if it's available to download online, but there's nothing better than looking at 340 pages of absolute fiction. Is about the best way to describe it.
I would agree with it, Rob. I mean, I've had the chance now to spend a couple of weeks going through it, and I can say quite sadly, I've taken it to bed quite a few nights.
It's great for that.
Laura's like, she's like, you are one sad person. I'm going through it because I'm like, you've got to study these things. If you're going to have a conversation about it, you've got to know what you're talking about.
No, that's the one thing that it's actually good for. You will glaze over and it will put you to sleep in no time.
Well, I do note with it is that if you actually read the document, aviation comprises only a very small portion of that document.
Yes.
And the vast majority is lauding their achievements of creating the 6,000 to 9,000 jobs that they believe that they've created for this airport.
Yeah.
And it's actually really deceiving and it's really misleading, from my opinion. Because if you were not aware of what makes up aviation and how small our industry genuinely is, you might pick up this document, you might read it and say, oh, this is unbelievable, 9,000 people. I mean, I was shocked when I read the aviation staffing numbers, and I was talking to someone and I said, I can't even believe there's that many instructors at the airport. I just don't believe it, because I know how many instructors work at Bankstown, because we catch up, we have nights at the Flyers, and even on a big night, you're only a fraction of that number. And so I really wonder what vetting processes these documents go through, and whether the government actually takes any time to check that they're just not being totally snowballed.
That's one of the major traumas that we've actually got with this. If you look at a couple of things that it's actually listed in this master plan, we've got aviation investments 2015 to 2020. For anybody that wants to read it, it's page 143. It's wonderful fiction. The problem with that is, if no one says anything against that, you've got to believe it, because it's printed. So exactly as what you were saying, is if you had somebody else that was not in the industry actually look at this document, they would think that it's fantastic. They'd say, look, we've got all these, we've got walking tracks, we've got wonderful things where we're looking after the environment, and we're building new buildings, and we're doing all these wonderful things, and it's all for the good and graciousness of aviation. If you didn't know what was actually going on, you would look at this and go, fantastic document, let's sign off on it. And I believe that that's what's happened in the past. One of the things that was actually very interesting, somebody's gone through a couple of the previous master plans, yet to have this actually completely identified, but I'll throw it out so we can have a little look at it later. In the 2010 master plan, there was the promotion of construction of an engine test cell on the airport. I believe in the 2015 master plan, it was said that the engine test cell was completed. No one knows where it is. What we did find out was there was a revetment was actually dug out so that they could park the engine test trucks in that. That now currently has a building on it.
So, Rob, this might interest you. I have an airports advocacy team that I've put together over the last 5 years, and it comprises of really interesting people. So I've actually got former airport managers, I've got risk assessors, I've got local council staff, And strangely enough, they're all people who have basically joined the dark side. Through their employment and working through these processes, one by one came to the determination that they just can't work in those roles anymore because they spend all their time effectively, bullshitting. Right?
Yes.
And one of the guys after the meeting last week, he messaged me and he said, "Ben, here's an excerpt. The Townsville master plan went through the Department of Infrastructure for review. And this will give you an idea of what they think is important when they were reviewing the document. It identified Section 7, land use planning. Of all the things you could actually have problems with, i.e. the land is not being used for aviation, it's being used for non-aviation, let's focus on the real issues. This is what infrastructure we're concerned with. We need to strengthen linkages between the master plan and other key documents such as Our North, Our Future, the white paper on developing Northern Australia. Whilst it's recognised some documents are not yet finalised, it'd be prudent to acknowledge them and the potential for them to influence Townsville Airport's future development planning. The Enterprise Precinct section notes that low-flying, flat topography is a development constraint and states that fill may be required to permit the development in affected areas. This is all for non-aviation. The same notation should be made for the North Aviation Precinct. In other words, what was more of a concern to infrastructure was making sure that the master plan made reference to all the other documents pertaining to development in the region. There was absolutely no concern that the master plan process laid no opportunity for aviation. And so, I hold the same concerns for this document. And one of the reasons we're trying to do this interview process is I want to go to Canberra, I want to talk directly with the government, with the senators, and I actually want to go and meet with infrastructure to say that the current processes are clearly not working.
Well, the current processes are not working in any way, shape or form because there are no checks and balances. No one from infrastructure has gone back through the previous master plans and said, you said you were going to do this, it's all in print, did you do it? And one of the issues that we've actually brought up with infrastructure recently is we said, can you please tell us who has looked at the previous master plans, who has found out whether any of the works were done? And by the way, can you please explain why they have the ability to pick and choose what they do or what they don't do out of the master plans?
No,
That's right.
it's
Just want to double check that we haven't an interruption on that.
It's a bit late.
Is Townsville a joint military civilian airport?
I understand, yeah.
Well, how can they do any development?
Well, much like Newcastle Airport, it shares a space, but it can still be split. I just want to make sure that we're definitely still running. We didn't get an interruption on it, and it is just a little bit laggy, and I apologise for
That's
that.
right.
We're running on a mobile connection. We're also sent some documents just in the lead up to another individual that's here this evening, and he was sharing a document that was from the Deputy Prime Minister's office going back 10, 15 years ago. And it's a really interesting document. It's one that
I got that
has
one,
been
yes.
shared with you. And
Yep.
it was astounding to read that the government at the time was communicating to the aviation, the concerned aviation organisation and individuals that the privatisation process was supported by a framework of checks and balances, and that
what does that mean?
There were mechanisms in place, and that they were monitoring these leases, and they were actually working on this. And I want to follow this up because this really does sit in the centre of this discussion. That
Yes.
It seems to me, and I may not be the smartest guy in aviation, but it seems to me that quite literally they just let control go,
Yes.
and they haven't been checking on it, because we've got example after example after example where there appears to be some quite unconscionable conduct by airport operators, and in many cases quite predatory conduct in the way in which leases are negotiated and prices are set and their negotiations are handled.
One thing I will bring up with that point, when you look at the predatory aspect of it and the way that things have been set, it's interesting when you look at it. Everyone says, oh, MAC this, or BAL, whatever, whoever the airport operators are. What we need to do is we need to go back and look a little bit further up the food chain. Who owns MAC? Who owns BAL? And actually start looking at those companies in depth to say, what are they doing? And we know what they're doing here.
Well, in the example of Bankstown, we had a really bizarre situation where when you look at it, it goes, oh, it makes sense, doesn't it? That the airport was originally sold off through the privatisation process, and
Yes.
then that company went broke.
Yep.
Then it went through a sale process, and then the politicians' superannuation fund for the New South Wales state government stepped in and bought the airport. And so we've got the New South Wales state government superannuation fund that looks after all the politicians' superannuation accounts now owns this airport. And of course, the whole purpose of a super fund is to make massive returns
Is this starting to stink yet?
for your customers. And so First State Super, which is now called Aware Super, and they probably get changed their name because someone's probably looking. But we've got the superannuation fund, and I've actually, on the issue of Bankstown, I've literally laid on the tracks of hangar doors as the airport's been trying to evict people, and I have physically laid on those doors and stopped them closing the doors to keep businesses at that airport. I can speak firsthand for this. They are menacing
Yes.
in the force that they will apply to achieve their outcomes. But I've also recently been involved in negotiating with these companies, and I have never seen more ruthless people in my life than what I have seen negotiating these property leases. And I sat in one particular negotiation in Sydney, and I watched as the airport's property guy just looked across the table and said, if you can't afford to be here, get the hell out.
That's
And I was
pretty
shocked.
standard.
I was shocked that he could talk to that business in that manner, and that he had no reservation in that engagement, because he knew. And I kind of looked at him almost in admiration, going, well, that's what it must feel like to know that you are absolutely unaccountable, that no one is coming after you, that that you're not accountable at all. No one is coming at you. No one is going to hold you to any standard. You can do whatever you want, because they know the federal government literally washed its hands. And I would relate it back to, even if we had something like a Department of Fair Trading that you could go to as a business to say, look, I'm trying to negotiate a fair price. I was on this. They're asking for 3 times as much. I can't afford to pay this. They force their way. It kills my business. It forces my staff out, everything, and have some level of protection. But there is nothing. Your only recourse is to quite literally file a Supreme Court action,
Yes.
which will cost you $250,000 to $350,000 minimum to sort out a property dispute, which is why nobody challenges it. And so they know, these property guys know, and I won't name the business, but the last negotiation that I was participating in was quite a prominent organisation that we all need access to them in order to fly. So I'm not going to mention who they are, but there's only very few businesses on an airport that you need access to, otherwise you can't fly. And I know if you're watching this broadcast right now. But just told, you either take it or get the hell off there or get out. We'll find a non-aviation business that will quite happily take that position.
Yes.
And so is that the same? Is that your experience with
Of course it is. Of course it is. And as James said previously too, how many years did you have had a lease? Al? James?
5 years.
5 years, okay. With my building that was taken from me in Northern Avenue, my lease expired on that 2017. I entered into discussion with the Airport Corporation, and they said, we'll get back to you.
Did they ever get back to you?
Yeah, they got back to me in 2021 when they said, oh, your lease is in holdover, and we need your hangar, so here's your eviction notice, 6 months, during the middle of COVID-19. Thank you very much. 13th of June 2020 was when I was given my eviction notice.
COVID has been used by quite a number of airport operators, and probably one of the most prominent was Canberra Airport decided to use COVID-19 as an excuse to shut down the cross runway. And I drew up a map. I made a lot of headlines out of it. Unfortunately, I did a radio interview, and I told the guy on the radio, I said, well, let's just wake up to ourselves. Terry Snow has made hundreds of millions of dollars off the back of the Australian taxpayer of Canberra, and the government just threw money at that airport. He didn't even have to fund much of it. The government was throwing the money out. But Terry's made a fortune out of Canberra, and all he wanted to do was close that cross runway because the Madura Business Park could be expanded right across if the cross runway disappeared. And so they used this absolute, it was just disgusting, COVID-19, and this was the thing, the airfield is not being used as much, and now it's costing us more to maintain it. And I remember saying this guy on the radio saying, imagine that. If you use the tarmac less, it costs you more to maintain it. I said, it's like, the world's gone upside down, but they got away with it. And, we wrote letters to the Deputy Prime Minister's office, nothing. Wouldn't look at it. We can't interfere. we've got to allow these commercial businesses. I mean, at what point do you draw the line? And I guess, is that what we're seeing here at Moorabbin? Has the line already been crossed?
That's gone. It's way gone. I mean, to follow on a little bit from what I was saying with the moving into this new facility that I've got, which is my now 70-year-old hangar, I actually purchased that hangar from the airport 8 months prior to the eviction notice. And they gave me a 10-year lease. It was a 5-year plus 5-year lease. And I was actually quite happy to get this. But the last page of the lease has got a wonderful little piece written on it where it says that there is a 6-month redevelopment clause. So if you then look at that, I don't have a 10-year lease. I have a 6-month lease, because within 6 months' notice, they can evict me from it. Now, one of the classics things, another one of the things that's actually in the master plan is that they're talking about how to make the airport greener. And we're talking about solar, and we're talking about, rechargeable cars, and we're talking about apparently electric aeroplanes we're going to have too. Don't forget the train station. One of the things that we looked into was solar, because of course when we moved into the hangar there was the original high bay lighting, so we got the LED people in. They were quite happy with it all. They said, "Oh, have you got a lease on the property?" "Yes, here's the lease. Don't look at the back page, please." And then they said, "Oh, can we come back and quote you for solar?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we need to know that you've got a minimum of a 10-year lease." And I said, "Well, it's not quite 10 years." And they said, "If you cannot show us a 10-year lease, we will not put solar in." So we are now again behind the 8 ball for...
It's almost like you've got to fight for everything.
Got to fight for everything.
I think also it is a fair statement. It needs to be said that I don't believe anybody in the aviation industry wants to be at odds or in conflict or at war or in a fight with the airport operators.
We got better things to do.
Nobody wants that. I think that businesses on the whole, for businesses that I've interviewed over the years and I've met with, I have never met one of them that has said to me, I get out of bed in the morning because I just want to fight a big corporate multinational. No one says that, right? They want to run their businesses. They want some natural enjoyment from their leases. They just want to be able to get on and drive their business and build success and build their superannuation. But how do you do that in an environment where every single thing you need from an airport just becomes a tireless battle?
You work out when it's good to stop.
Well, Dick Smith's been saying this now for the last 3 years. He's copped a lot of criticism because he's publicly been running around just saying to people, do not invest in general aviation, get out. It's gotten so bad, you're wasting your money. All you're doing is you're taking on massive heartache. These airports are not interested in actually fostering aviation at all. Why hand them whatever money you do have to then find out in 5 years' time you can't get your leases renewed, or if you do want your lease renewed, you've got to pay 3 and 4 times. Yep. Be smart, get out now and leave the industry. I mean, is it that bad? I mean, are we at a point now where it's really not worth investing in these locations?
Depends upon the location. All I'd say to people is go find somewhere where you can get freehold.
And in doing that, though, with locations like Moorabbin and Bankstown and Jandakot and Parafield and Archerfield, are we not simply handing the airport developers, though, what they want? Is this not what they actually want to achieve?
Of course.
If the aviation industry disappears tomorrow, they then go crying poor to the government saying, there's just no demand and we can't make it work, and you've now got to let us tear the runways up because we could put in big industrial estates, and we've got to maintain the lawns.
Of course they're going to do it.
We're not just handing them that opportunity.
We're not necessarily. I don't believe we're handing it to them, but I think we're being forced to hand it to them. After a while, you just look at it. It's what I said before. It's just good to stop, because sometimes you just look at it and you go, you can't put up with the stress anymore. You can't put up with the trauma. You look at it every single day. Am I going to survive? Is my company going to survive? Is my business going to survive? Who's next to have a go at me? Sometimes you look at it and you go, you know what? I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
So we've got this master plan. It's obviously looming over the top of the entire community here at Moorabbin. Again, if you were sitting in front of the Deputy Prime Minister right now, what would you be saying? What would you be communicating on this?
I would ask him, can you please tell me how you're going to make sure that all of it's going to be done? And if you're going to do that, can you please go back to the 2010 and the 2015 and make sure that everything's been done in there? Because the only thing that's been done is advancement to non-aviation.
Given that these are Commonwealth sites and that this is taxpayer property.
Yes.
This is taxpayer infrastructure. and that they've been leased to these companies, do you feel that it would be appropriate for the government at this point to hold a genuine inquiry into the performance of privatisation at this airport, looking at all of these master planning documents and assessing whether the government has in fact been misled through these processes?
I laughed a little with the genuine inquiry, because I don't believe we'll ever see a genuine inquiry. I would love to see one. I would love to see a genuine inquiry into everything that's gone on there. How can a private company tear up taxiways they don't own? There's wonderful signs everywhere that says, owned and operated by Goodman Group. They don't own the airport. We do.
The best one's our aviation security fence on the 2010 plan.
Yeah.
They just cut it down.
Yep. Do we want to talk about, it just goes on and on and on.
Do you feel that they have breached
Of course they
the
have.
covenants of the lease? Do you feel that they've in some manner failed to deliver on the fundamentals of what they're here to do?
Yes. How's the airport security at Bankstown?
Well, we've just been through this crazy process where we've got amazing amounts of money being spent on all these lovely black spiked fences going in everywhere. And we've got code locks, which the codes are written on the back of the gates. So if you walk in with a mirror, or if you can't find them there, just go get yourself an Ursa.
And it's in there.
And it's in there. I mean, it's a furphy. I mean, I had it leads into a conversation about the whole argument about what ASIC has done to private general aviation, which in my view is it's been incredibly detrimental.
But if you go through their master plans, this is actually hilarious. And what they've offered. So they've offered a hangar site down here next to J-Road, but that hangar site isn't built enough, so you'd have to cut the gate off, right? So the gate to access the airport. Now the only other gate to access the airport is next to Tony's hangar, Kirkhope Aviation. Guess what? They're gone. So the two access gates are actually going to go in, their master plan. So how are we actually going to get a vehicle on the airport?
So that might be a little bit hard for, it won't be picked up clearly on the microphone, but maybe just summarise what he was talking about there and we can...
The issues that we see, that's what I was getting to with the security side of things. The access on the airport, we've got two access gates. It's one southern and one western. If they start talking about doing the next building that they are proposed, and I'll underline proposed in the master plan, the southern access gate will be gone. But if you have a look at also with the construction that they're talking about with the 2021 master plan, the western gate will be gone because there'll be a road there. So that means that technically you'll end up with no access on the airport for vehicles. That can be cured quite relatively simply, but again, will they do it? Maybe, maybe not. But the airport security side of things that I was talking about previously, you got cameras on Bankstown?
Yeah.
Do they work?
Yeah, they do.
Wow. Wonder who paid for that?
Probably a grant.
No, if we go back to 2001, there was something that happened in September. DOTARS came out and said that all the security controlled airports had to have cameras on them.
Well, I think Bankstown Airport security was only reviewed. It probably would have been about 2 years ago after one of the old boys in the media announced that you could freely walk onto the aerodrome and that the codes were on the back of the gates, and there was a real tears, and Lee De Winton, who was the CEO at the time, it all went into panic mode, and then all of a sudden we got all these lovely new gates and fences, and there was a gate rationalisation. In fact, the gate security rationalisation was brilliant because you had all these private hangars, and they came down and changed all the padlocks, and none of the owners could get into their hangars. And when I went and saw Lee, I just said, Lee, you're charging, it was costing $950 a month to lease a T hanger for a Bonanza, and you couldn't even get into the gate. You had to walk down and around, and I was saying to Lee, half these old boys with the aeroplanes, no offence, half the old boys, they're almost at Zimmer frame.
Yeah.
And I said, they're trying to traipse down the airport in the wet, and they've got to carry gear. What are you doing? Oh, security, security. It's just a nonsense, and I see it going on everywhere. And it's, whether it's here or whether it's Bankstown, this type of silliness seems to go on. But look, back to the master plan.
Yes.
You sound like you have very little faith that MAC would actually elect to do the right thing.
I'll point out one thing. It's not MAC that's going to do anything. It's Goodman's. Goodman will do whatever they want.
And MAC effectively just an
MAC
operational puppet of
they're a puppet.
Yeah.
The strings are pulled from Sydney.
So you'd be asking the Deputy Prime Minister to stop this document in its tracks? You'd want to
Yes.
see this one brought to a close?
Yes.
If they stop this in its tracks, what would you think will happen next?
What's got to happen? Well, really what's got to happen is an inquiry into how it got this far, how the control has been let go so much so that an individual organisation can do whatever they like. If we I'll backstep a little bit. You've obviously seen this letter that is running around where they said that in the 2015 master plan, and by the way, this came out of the Deputy Prime Minister's office, whether it be by his pen or by one of his staffers, they came out and they said that there was a 3.9 hectare area development going ahead on the western end of Moorabbin Airport on Grange Road, which they had approved the moving of the fence 50 metres to the east, and 2 buildings to be then put onto Grange Road. The question has now gone back to the DPM's office by numerous people, and so far we haven't heard a response from them, but that fence was not moved 50 metres to the east. The fence was moved 198 metres, and that development is not 3.9 hectares, it's 9.4 hectares. It is not 2 buildings, it is 3 buildings. Who approved it?
Well, Rob, my response to that, and, I see exactly what you're saying with it, but let's contrast this example with what's happened at Essendon. Now, we managed to find an entire DFO constructed at Essendon that after that tragic 21st February accident a few years ago, and I remember the accident because it happened on my birthday, and I was so enraged by that accident because that accident could very well happen here.
Yes.
It could very well happen at Bankstown once the new logistics centres are completed. And in fact, it was only a year and a half ago I was called in by flight school saying, Ben, we desperately need you to come in here. We've got an absolute throng of media. We don't know what to do. And I'm like, what's happened? So one of the girls has just force landed the Piper quite literally next to the flying school in the ditch. And we've got cameras everywhere. And then, in all honesty, I get to deal with television cameras and I'm comfortable with it and it's just something I do. But I guess for some people, it's a pretty frightening experience and they're really worried about the media will want to portray this a certain way. So I quickly don the AOPA suit and off I go, and I stand there and I say to the cameras, I'm going to give you this press briefing in 10 minutes. And then I go inside and say, quick, get the ARO to come over and put the pilot in the van and take her airside and get her out of here. We handled the situation, but I walked out to the cameras and I had 10 minutes to prep for it. I said, take a good look over there because that aeroplane today is sitting in a ditch. But in 12 months' time, that aeroplane has just careened through the roof of a 3-storey steel and concrete structure and there's a fatality. This is what airport privatisation is doing to our airports nationwide. We're placing buildings that are not conducive to improving safety into airport environments. And that 21st February accident at Essendon, where that King Air clipped the DFO, was just a classic example of the buildings just too damn close. Yeah. There's not enough safety margin at the airport. And of course, I went on camera the next day. It was Studio 10. I went on live and I said it was a national disgrace. And quite literally, I felt the government has blood on its hands and it's going to happen again. Sooner or later, that accident is going to happen again because we're allowing these buildings to get closer and closer and they're quite large structures. And the government were really angry at me. And it was Darren Chester at the time who declared that he would never meet with me ever again because he thought, how dare I blame the government for this? But then the inquiry got going a year later. And what does the inquiry find? That the building was built inside the OLS. Yeah. The building's actually not supposed to be where it is. Somehow infrastructure managed to massage this thing. And the guy responsible for massaging it got a horizontal promotion out of infrastructure, ended up going from the Secretary of Infrastructure, the most prized portfolio for a bureaucrat in the entire government, and ended up moved sideways into arts and communications and was left there for 12 months until he then got to resign. And so I fear that the people that are actually ultimately responsible for a lot of this nonsense, they've been able to get away. They've left the system now. We may never be able to hold them to account for what they've done. But what I would say is, we know that this is wrong, but we also know that so many other building developments are wrong. And even when there was a fatal accident and the government had the opportunity to really use that momentum to say, let's bring all this to a head, it wasn't able to muscle up to it. So if they weren't able to muscle up to that, do you think that they're going to be able to muscle up to this?
No. Because they're going to have to go up against large corporations. Large corporations have large votes. Large corporations have large amounts of money to do political things if they need to. I don't think that they will actually come up and do anything about it. I believe what will happen, much to the dismay of this airport and the people in this room, they will do exactly whatever they want.
Well, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that I see this as a challenge of Michael McCormack's Deputy Prime Ministership. And I think it is. I think that if he signs this master plan off, what he has just done is he's loudly communicated that the National Party no longer stands with working Australians.
Correct.
And that it's actually the lapdog of multinational corporates.
Yep.
And all he's interested in is securing and looking after his big corporate mates.
Yep.
And I think he's got a real chance here. And I know I'm often criticised because people say, oh, Benny's so hard against the government. Yeah, probably am. I think he's got an opportunity. And the opportunity is to send a very powerful message that he actually, as the Minister for Infrastructure responsible for aviation,
takes the responsibility.
Takes it seriously, stands up for the constituency of aviation and protects the aviation industry. And if he doesn't do that, I think that at that point in time, our industry really has the rights, I think, to put the boxing gloves on and to start really pummeling down on the nationals for what is really starting to shape up to be decades of real failure.
Yep.
Decades of real failure. Yep. Well, look, Rob, I really appreciate you giving us some time.
Not a problem.
It's a difficult topic, and I know at times people get a little bit sensitive about it. They're worried about, do I take a stand and talk about particular issues because I'm worried that it might prejudice my ability to sort out my situation. And there's always that risk in it, but I think it's really important that organisations like the Chamber, individuals, businesses, do actually communicate what's going on, because the senators are often completely unaware. They just don't know what's going on, and I think everything that we can do to communicate these problems is only going to be healthy for the industry. And unfortunately, there's a few of us might have to take a few bullets along the way, but I see it as a good thing. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Who else would like an opportunity to come and have a chat? Why don't we grab Tony and then we'll go to Dave? How about that? Yep. Tony, where are you? Why don't you come up? Yeah, Tony Kirkhope is from Kirkhope Aviation, runs a charter business and is a flight school as well. Charter? Just charter business. I've had the opportunity to have a couple of telephone conversations with Tony over the last few years, obviously based here at Moorabbin, and Tony's also involved with the Moorabbin Airport Chamber of Commerce. So we might just throw the camera at you there, Tony. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for joining us. What's your take on it all?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think you've run a pretty good meeting, so we don't want to go over old ground. One thing that I think has been an issue for me personally is a lack of consultation. It hasn't been mentioned too much yet.
When you say consultation, what do you mean by that?
Well, probably since January, I have been speaking to MAC every 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. Each time they have promised me a meeting to come and talk to me about the future of what's happening. Often the example was, or the result, the answer was basically when we get a master plan, but they would keep putting it off and saying in 2 weeks' time we'll organise a meeting. So 3 weeks' time I go and talk to them again, and there's still nothing arranged. That's been going on since really January this year. And in the meantime, all we're hearing is people getting evicted, and so we have no idea what's happening. Only last week, they've now agreed to a meeting in 2 weeks' time. So why they couldn't meet us straight away, I don't know. So the meeting now is in 2 weeks' time, around about the 20th, a month after the master plan's been produced. I have no idea what's happening, and my hanger's on the master plan to be demolished. So in the meantime,
Did anyone come in prior to this master planning process? Did someone come and sit down with you and say, by the way, Tony, look, we're bulldozing your facility?
No.
I mean, you're a leaseholder.
Sure.
You're a stakeholder here at the airport.
Yeah.
You've made a sizable investment in your aircraft and your business.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody from the airport management came along and sat with you and said, Tony, listen, just heads up, FYI, it's a lovely day outside. Look, just before I leave, by the way, we're bulldozing the hangar. Have a fun day. No one mentioned anything about it.
No, not in those terms, and no one has given me any idea when, where I could possibly go, and when it might happen. And in the meantime, we had a pseudo 9-year lease, and as who's mentioned about the fact that we've got the 6 month clause in there. Oh, Rob. We took the approach that we've got an office and a lounge, which is not good enough. So I spent 50 grand on it, and we've upgraded in the last couple of years, or last year.
You just lose all of that investment.
That's all gone now if that hangar goes in 6 months, if it does. So yeah, that's my biggest gripe at the moment. We have no idea of a future. And while they're giving all the aviation, all the land away to non-aviation people, there's nowhere for us to go.
Where do you? I mean, let's just play this situation out. Say that you're unable to negotiate a new facility, because undoubtedly they're going to come to you and say, we're going to build this lovely new facility. It's going to be a cost in this. They're not going to build this for nothing and then give it to you for nothing.
It depends what the cost is.
You get to the end of that process and it's too expensive and you can't make that work. Where do you go?
Well, you can't really go anywhere, because you need to go somewhere where there's maintenance. You need to go somewhere where there's instrument approaches, especially for us, because we're doing charters and nighttime flying and everything. And you won't get that in a lot of the regional small locations. So where can we go?
How long have you been
Mount Gambier,
How long
maybe?
have you been in business here?
20 odd years here, 40 years since I had my flying license.
It's kind of like your thanks for 40 years, and at the end of it, we're not even going to communicate, and you have to find out by way of a master plan that your building's going to be torn up.
It is on the list. Yeah. So it's
again,
very hard to make a decision.
I've asked the question of others. If you're sitting with, if you were sitting in front of the Senate RRAT today, what would you be saying to them on these issues? I mean, they're the oversight for...
Well, the master plan is a waste of time, and they've got to stop it, put a stop to it, basically.
You think infrastructure have kind of let the infrastructure guys at the Department of Infrastructure have let the aviation industry down? They haven't kept control of this situation?
Oh, obviously. Definitely. I'm speaking on behalf of, I think a lot of us, none of us really know what's going on. I don't know how many hangars are going next on stage 2, 5 or 6 or 7, something like that. None of us know where we're going to go. And there's lots of secret deals being done in the meantime. So there's no real coordination done to tell people, hey, this is the future. This is where you can plan. This is, there's no commitment to build taxiways and movement areas and plans prior to evicting people. So really, they should be sorting a way out of putting a plan in process so we actually know where we can go, and then you can go and demolish ours and build a better one. So that it's us about, for want of a better word.
The government creates an opportunity, if the Senate creates an opportunity, or the Deputy Prime Minister creates an opportunity maybe for participants here at Moorabbin to come to Canberra to meet with government officials and politicians to talk about this issue. Would you like that opportunity?
Oh, I think we should. Yeah, definitely.
And
they should come here too.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to be doing my level best to get them down here. Nothing's better than a press engagement with a whole stack of senators. I'm sure the airports people will love that. But it seems to me that we've got to take this issue really to Canberra. We really need to make certain that these politicians understand there's something very real going on here, and it's not positive, and it doesn't have a positive outcome for the industry. I mean, we stand to lose not only charter businesses, we stand to lose maintenance businesses and all the support businesses. This is taking away technical, skilled and trade employment at a time when our industry desperately needs it. I mean, this is just not positive at all.
We're all recovering from COVID. Like, we had no income for a year. And so we're suffering. And now we've got work. We've got to make it happen. But now you've got this threat of the potential movement. And like Blue Demon had to move, and half their gear is in our hangar. So we can't use the hangar as much now because they were moved out so quickly. They had to put all their stuff somewhere else. Yeah. Now they're going to be moved again, maybe. So that's not even sure. So there's just no planning. No timing. Nothing mentioned in the master plan about timing, who, where, when.
Did this ever happen under the federal government's ownership when the FAC ran these airports? Did you ever have these situations happening?
Oh, not like this. Not that I've ever seen. I mean, this is just, it's a downhill slope for aviation as far as I can see.
I mean, if you're sitting in front of the government inquiry and they ask you, do you feel where's the focus here at the airport? What does this airport appear to be focused on? What is it?
Yeah, money, warehousing, and make it simpler for, aviation is a pain in the neck for them, probably. You make a lot more money out of warehouses, I would expect. Make much more use out of the land. They probably want to just they're supposed to keep an airport, but what's an airport? Helipad or dirt runway that's 100 feet long? I don't know. So, yeah, we're just getting pressured to move, basically. Mainly because we've got no idea what's happening.
A terrible situation, and one that really does need to be resolved. You need to be able to plan for your business, and it's not right that you have to effectively run around guessing what's happening. So I just imagine the pressure and the stress there. Anything else you'd like to add?
I can only support everything that's been said, and there's been a lot of good comments. But yeah, they need to stop this thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you speaking up on the issues. I'm going to be doing my level best up in Canberra tomorrow, and hopefully we'll try and get some action on this and get some people taking some notice. So thank you for that.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it. Okay. Our next, Dave Berenholz. Actually looking forward to having a chat with Dave. Dave's a fellow long easy man. Focus, come back to me. His camera's playing up. Okay. Dave is actually featured on the front cover of an AOPA magazine at one point in time with his Long Easy project, and he's planning on flying a Long Easy around the world. I don't know if that makes you smart or insane.
Oh, quite insane. No question about that at all. Aviation is a virus. Once it's in, you're in a lot of trouble.
Well, Dave, we need passionate, exciting people to be part of aviation, and I guess it is pretty exciting to be building your own aircraft, and it takes a huge amount of passion to be able to see it through to completion. And then it takes a certain type of tenacity to then mount up and fly the airplane around the world. I mean, that's a pretty bold activity.
Well, it's 12,000 hours into it. I think I'm over it. The aeroplane's not yet built, not yet finished, but I will get there. It's only through the generosity of Royal Vic Aero Club that's let me in their hangar do the construction. But meanwhile, I have a flying Long Easy on the airport, and I've been there 15 years. And I'm very concerned that there's going to be no room for it soon. There's been so much building that has gone on, so much land has been taken away. Should any of the schools require hard stand parking area, I'm going to be gone. I'll have 30 days notice, and I'll have to fly from somewhere else.
Sometimes, Dave, you learn, you observe and you learn interesting things when you're just part of the background a little bit. Not being a business on the aerodrome and being an aircraft owner and a pilot, you see a great deal of stuff. I mean, from your perspective, what's the atmosphere at Moorabbin like as a consequence of the way it's being managed?
It's sad. It's sad. Aviation gives so much to individuals. Aviation makes you a better person. And I think it's something politicians don't understand. In an ideal world, politicians will be looking to bring out the best in people. That'd be the mission. The goal in life is to be a little bit better than when you started off. Aviation does that to you. It makes you kinder, makes you much more considerate to other people, makes you a critical thinker, and makes you really good in emergency situations. I think aviation's already saved my life. I was diving in Indonesia. They don't give you diving lessons there. You just go under the water, trapped in a cave. The guy in front of me was trapped. We were down probably 40, it was just before decompression. This guy's trapped. I've never dived before that day. And all I could think about, well, I didn't need to think about it. My training was such that I was completely calm and unhooked his gear and got the guy out. Because of aviation training, I became a better person than I was before it. And I think that applies in life. I'm more considerate. I spent an hour yesterday with a guy discussing about a radio frequency at a particular airport, because that's what we do. We want to be safe. We're really concerned about obeying rules. You end up with good people. It's a wonderful thing. And that's all this talk, all the things that we've talked about tonight, it's all about money. It's horrible. I mean, what's happening to these businesses is just horrible. It is sad. We've got these old buildings. Who put money into a building when you're going to be turfed out of it? I was involved with a hangar development here at Moorabbin 3 years ago. I was going to be one of 6 hangars, and there were going to be 2 more developments, so 18 hangars in total. We would
So
have
18 private hangars.
private hangars.
So part of a group that was offering to bring the construction of 18 brand new
hangars.
that would have housed 18 aeroplanes.
We had the plans done. I'd paid quite a substantial deposit. The people were lined up. They'd all paid their deposits. We got to the point where we had signed leases from Moorabbin Airport Corporation. Signed leases. I'd signed with the developer, and so had everyone else. We had a nice yellow digger on the site ready to go. There was a little sign up saying who it was, and suddenly everything stopped. I don't know what happened. We didn't back out of it, but we were prevented from going ahead. It all got shut down, no hangars.
That location in which those hangars were going to be built, where is that on the aerodrome?
Near DFO on the northern side.
What's there now?
Nothing at the moment. I'm told there are going to be hangars built by MAC. Whether that's in the master plan or not, I haven't bothered checking. I'm desperate
So
for
you
a hangar.
hadn't, so let me just try and understand this, Dave. I want to get my head around it. Is that you actually bought them an opportunity to put in 18 hangars. That's not a small investment.
Oh, no.
That's a reasonable chunk of cash there. And you went right through the whole process. You had the digger on site ready to start all your earthworks.
Yep.
And they came in and just with a stop work order, this has to cease.
Well, the developer was in charge of it. I don't know exactly what happened, except we were not permitted to continue. If you've got signed leases and someone says, no, we're not going to honour that, well, you've got to do a court action, don't you? So where's your $500,000 to do that? So I got
did you end up having to go to court?
No, I got every cent of my deposit back from the developer. He was terrific. And he made whatever arrangements he made. We were told that MAC is going to build hangars on that spot. So fine, you want to spend the money? I'd say to Goodman's, guys, look, just give us a fair lease, give us a nice long one. We'll spend the money. I'll get 50 people in the next 7 days who want to build hangars at Moorabbin, no problem at all. In fact, this room would probably take care of that. We're happy to put our money in, but obviously you're going to make a lot more money out of a great big warehouse than you are with little aircraft hangars.
I noticed, Dave, on the master plan that they're proposing to create an aircraft parking over between the 2 runways.
God help us.
And I've kind of taken the document a few times and I've looked at it like, spun the page around going, how do you get to that site? Is that like, it's this bizarre location. It's kind of like they were heralding themselves in their master plan that, aren't we great, we've created this area. But it's kind of like, well, not if it requires a bus service to get to it.
I'm going to be a little bit cynical and put this idea across. Only a little bit cynical. At Moorabbin Airport, if the winds favour runway 13, I don't want to go that day because there's nowhere to go at 200 feet. If you have an engine failure, you're in trouble. To the north and to the south, there are still left a couple of golf courses. There's been so much development around the airport without thought of a couple of safety spots. We'll leave a bit of green area, put up a park.
That's real estate development space. What are you talking about?
Yeah, where was the government for that? Now, the cynical part is, well, if we have a couple of accidents, then we should close the airport because it's dangerous. The buildings that have been put up recently are causing wind shear when the wind's from the north. It's not a good, it's a training airport. Most of us are fine with that sort of situation, but you've got guys that are learning to fly. It just makes things a little bit harder. When they put all this parking in, if you have to go off to the right, if you're flying down to the south,
You're into it.
you're going to be, instead of off into a ditch, as you were saying before, the same thing will happen at Moorabbin Airport. There'll be nowhere to go. If you're not on tarmac, you're in deep trouble. So I've got lots of concerns about the airport, but I want to stay here. I love the airport. I don't blame Goodman's. They do what they do. That's their business. But I do point to the government and say, hey, guys, this is not how things should work. Something's a little bit smelly here. And so I'd certainly support an inquiry. and support what's happening at the airport for all the businesses here and all the just regular Joes like me, got a little cheap aeroplane, want to go flying every week. Where are the people for that? There's no room for us anymore. So it's become a very sad situation, which answers your original question. It's not a happy airport as it was. I still wave at people. After 2 or 3 years, I started waving back.
Brilliant. Well, it's part of the big picture, isn't it? I mean, you can't just have an airport for business. Airports have to be there for aircraft owners and pilots and businesses and social groups and aero clubs. It has to be a multifaceted and diverse community for an airport to function and to succeed and grow. And it's all part of that, isn't it? I mean, when you look at some of the most successful airport examples in the US, they have really thriving private airport community sections. They have thriving FBOs. They have great solid maintenance businesses and restoration shops. And, there's an atmosphere about it in the United States. It's just a completely different atmosphere of a real freedom and enjoyment for aviation. And yet, unfortunately, here in Australia, it's become a very painful process for people to remain involved. And, my hat goes off to our community, which has been reducing in size and hasn't actually been increasing, because aviation, from what I can see, has survived because of an absolute passion. But if you took away the passion, it'd be gone tomorrow, because the profitability in the business is all but evaporated. And I know I use this example all the time. There's Poor Maintenance Company in Bankstown. They've been there for 50 years. They've got a Bellman hangar. I don't know how much a Bellman hangar costs here, but they're paying in excess of $135,000 a year for a Bellman hangar. And I walk in and I see these guys, they're working flat out. And they can't afford not to work at warp speed, because you've got to try. You think about how many annuals you need to do just to cover the $135,000 in rent, then the power bills, then the phone bills, then the internet bills, then your engineers' costs, then their superannuation and all their on costs. I mean, by the time these poor buggers get to the end of it, they are literally scraping. And then the airport operator comes in saying, we want another 20%. And I've been part of those negotiations where you're saying to the operator, you just can't get blood from this stone. I've got plenty of businesses lined up, Ben, and I'm just looking around going, who? Like, at these prices, you'd want to be running an IT warehouse, not an aviation maintenance business. So it's, Dave, it's a pretty sad situation. But thanks for giving your perspectives on it, and keep up the hard work with the longies.
Yes, I'll get it done.
And I'm definitely going to come over tonight. I'm going to poke my head in the hangar and have a look after this. So I do appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks so much, mate.
Thank you.
Okay. What else have we got here, Sean? Or is everyone?
I think everybody's done.
Does anyone want to say a few words?
Yeah. Look, I'm a trainee pilot. I bought.
Come up, mate. I've only got one microphone up here at the front, and I'll get you to jump in. So we're just taking a few questions from the floor. People had obviously can ask some questions, or you can make some statements, or otherwise.
Yeah.
What's your name, mate?
My name's Andrew McFadden.
Hey, Andrew. Ben Morgan.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, likewise, mate. Go ahead.
Well, I had the opportunity to be able to get into aviation after, like 30 odd years of, waiting for it to be right. And when the opportunity came up, I was able to research it, and I decided, well, I'll buy a plane to start my training in, which is sort of, I guess, unheard of. Most people would probably buy like training hours with a school and then go use their facility. So I thought, well, I'll start off and I'll buy a plane, learn to train in that plane. That way it's going to mean that I don't have to change different planes. I'll be able to train, learn that particular model. Did some research, and I went for the Piper Tomahawk. Managed to buy one at the start of this year, and I've been keeping it maintained, putting additional maintenance into it. Trying to find a parking space, because I've not purchased reserve space at the airport. I thought, I'll park on the grass somewhere. And I found that even just parking on the grass has its own challenges, because it's not a reserved area, but it's the cheapest that I could afford, as well as the insurance, as well as the ongoing maintenance and everything else that goes along with owning a plane. it'll work out cheaper for me in the long run because I'm looking to go to get my CPL. But at this point in time, I'm 14 hours into my training. And what I have noticed is that coming into land on runway 17 left, I've noticed that there's, you get some like turbulence when you go over the golf field with, the water, and then you got the tarmac, and then you get onto the runway. And I've also found that when you go to take off, even though there's no building there, when you start to go over the buildings and you add about, say, 400 feet, you still do hit some turbulence that are coming off the buildings on the other side of the road. So my big concern is, am I going to become another, statistic because I'm just learning? And if I hit wind shear or turbulence because there's buildings that are closer to the runway, how's that going to affect the Tomahawk? Because the Tomahawks were originally designed to enter into a flat spin relatively easy, and you need to put in the correct controls to be able to pull it out. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that at 400 feet. You need at least about 1,500 feet at the very least, and a height of about 35,000 or 3,500 to 4,000 feet to be able to recover from a flat spin. So my big concern is I'm going to be training in a Piper Tomahawk, which I love training and I love flying. But my big concern is that with all this development that they're proposing, especially towards the end of the runway down along this area,
on that southern side.
Yeah, and they've got that as airport infrastructure. Okay, what does that mean? My guess is that they're going to be putting buildings on that side. Okay, if you have to abort a landing, you're going to have buildings at the end of that runway that's, you're going to be doing a Wile E. Coyote into. Yeah. It's just not going to work out. And we've already seen that with poor training that you're going to basically have like pilots crashing here and there, as we saw with Saw Aviation. But more importantly, what's going to happen when you've got like proper training, but you've just got horrible circumstances that like perfect storm situation.
Yeah, well, the buildings at these airports are certainly posing an interesting threat, and I'll use the word threat because it actually is a threat. And we know from the construction of the buildings that were placed at Canberra that in certain weather conditions at Canberra, the rotors that are created there are so significant that there actually have been a number of light aircraft upset events caused there, and actually larger aircraft that have had problems as well. This all comes part of, I guess what Rob was amplifying, that, this stuff is just going through the system. There's no checks and balances in place. And typically the government is then in a situation where it's reacting to the problem once it's been constructed. And so to undo it is, a significant challenge.
Now, I managed to find some old plans from 2007 of what Moorabbin Airport, 1977, I think it was. And on the plans, they had taxiways going across here and joining up along here.
Correct.
And as you can see, there's now buildings in that area. And I've spoken to one other person online that basically said that they had to go in for an emergency landing, and they actually used that particular taxiway to come into land. There's buildings there now. There's no chance of basically going anywhere other than making a drive through.
Absolutely is reducing your options. And again, this stuff needs to be brought up as part of that post review to get the government to look at the fact that these master plans have all been approved. This is what's now been created, but to then start assess what risks have been created with that construction. Because there are some real risks and threats there that now need to be managed. I saw at one end of one runway, you've got what looks like the half-built pyramid of Giza.
Oh, Mount Moorabbin.
Mount PFOS.
That's contaminated soil.
Yeah,
and that's been dumped there by what was it? The developer was that Goodman that dumped it there?
I'm not sure, but I looked at that pile and I just thought to myself, how did that get approved? It's right at the end of a runway.
How did it get what?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Maybe it hasn't been approved at all.
Green, though.
But how does a situation arise where at the end of a runway you have this enormous pile, this mound of dirt, and it's not a small mound, is it? It's like multiple stories high. And I was just looking at it thinking, what kind of fool have you got to be to think that it's not a risk? It's not a real tangible risk if something's going wrong. And I just look back to that that really tragic accident that occurred at Essendon, where the aircraft just did not have enough performance to get him up over the top of the building, and he hit the building. And it's sooner or later we're going to have an accident where someone's not going to be able to clear the mound of PFOS, and God forbid they go over the other side of the mound and then they're into traffic, and God knows what the outcome there
Well,
is.
the other health risks involved with PFAS is also the fact that it is close to the Melbourne DFO. To the Moorabbin DFO, and you've got food outlets that are in that vicinity. Now, lo and behold, you get, they're trying to cover it up, trying to get the...
When we say cover it up, they're trying to cover the mound up.
Yeah, and they're trying to get vegetation growing
I'm just
on it.
thinking I can hear John Maitland now saying, oh.
And they're trying to get vegetation growing on it. But if you get strong wind, you're still going to get, contaminants from the soil blowing off there onto into the food outlets. And that's basically a health risk in itself.
I think they're all valid points, and what it really amplifies is that we need a review process. There needs to be an inquiry process so that pilots like yourself can go along. The wonderful thing about a Senate inquiry is you have parliamentary privilege. You basically can go in and you can name people, and you can speak honestly, and you can speak openly, and no one can sue you, right? And I think that's what we need at this point in time. We need a vehicle in which the industry can come forward and can talk about these issues and can put their documents on the table. They can lay out and prosecute their argument for the way that they've been treated, the things that have gone on, and just lay it bare and let the government, let the senators see it, let the country see it. Because we take those videos and we publish them everywhere. We make sure everyone in the aviation industry gets to see them. And it's vital, because we've got to start having a public discussion about the impacts of all of this, because there are real impacts, with health impacts, safety impacts, managing the threats, managing the erosion of the aviation assets, and the undermining of the success of aviation in general. So I agree with it all. If you had the Deputy Prime Minister in front of you right now, what would you be saying to him?
I would be saying, to start off with, these buildings need to be, this whole contract needs to be cancelled. More importantly, that mound of PFAS has been dumped at the other end of the runway. Whichever developer dumped that needs to be brought to task and basically clean that up. They had a hotel that was demolished over in Carlton, and that was done against zoning regulations, and it was a historical site. They brought that developer to task and basically brought him into court. Same thing should be done with that amount of PFAS.
In Sydney, they had the Barangaroo development site, and they were digging out the dirt from Barangaroo, and they shipped it by trailer and dogs by road all the way down to Port Kembla, and they were using the fill to fill up the port wharf for the new ships. And somewhere along the process, they discovered that there was small contaminants of asbestos.
Yep.
And it required every last inch of soil to be removed from Port Kembla, and it all had to be taken to a processing facility, and it had to be removed out of Barangaroo, had to be removed out of Port Kembla. They had to clear both sites, and the soil had to be processed and dealt with. And so I'm shocked at these airport locations that do have these PFOS issues, that they haven't been held to the same construction standards as other major projects. It just seems to be an issue that's been conveniently swept aside.
It's Commonwealth land. You don't have to worry about the
Checks and balances.
approvers.
Part of the problem, though, is that by having it under this current structure, things just
If you look at their
disappear.
timescale, you think it's not planned. They had to build Mount PFOS because they had to drive the trucks around from on airport land, so they had a road going where the factories are now, right? So they had to drive the trucks, get the mountain built before they could build their factories.
Yeah.
So, everyone's saying, oh, they're planned this out miles in front.
What
Some
James
smart
was saying,
people.
They weren't allowed to take that dirt on public roads.
Yeah, they actually weren't.
Illegal.
That's how contaminated it
Yeah.
was.
The bigger question is, how much of that dirt is in all the air conditioning and factory outlets?
That's going to have to be checked. And that's another health and safety issue.
Well,
More
I'm
importantly-
able to raise the aviation issues. I don't know if I'm the advocate for PFOS.
But the other thing as well, as they dig up more of the land at the other end of the runway, how much more contaminated soil are they going to dig up?
Probably don't want to find that out.
Well, it's something that needs to be addressed.
It goes
Absolutely.
to the credibility of the planning and approval process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What has happened and what's proposed to happen.
Well, if they're prepared to go to an extent to allow that, then it shows that they do allow everything else to go on. And I think that's amplified. And in all the conversations that I've had on these issues, and David, the conversations we've had at a board level, the thing that worries us is that the safeguards that are supposed to be there with infrastructure just aren't working. And that, to me, is the big message in this. The big takeaway is that the minister, in my opinion, his responsibility really needs to be to step in on top of infrastructure at this point, to say, infrastructure, you really need a total whole of house review on how you're handling these issues, because ultimately it has to pass through them before it gets to the minister. So the failure is not necessarily just with the minister on its own, it's with that department. So, but I appreciate the views that you put forward here tonight, and I thank you for coming and raising them. And it's important that all this stuff does get raised, and hopefully over the coming weeks and months we can get a review going. And I'd absolutely encourage you, if we can make that happen, to get to Canberra and sit before the government and put it on the table, because that's how we change the system.
Yeah.
We change the system by standing up and speaking to the issues. And again, I'm going to harp on it. I know people in aviation tend to be pretty quiet on stuff. We're a conservative industry and not a lot of us like to get out there and make too much noise. This is actually how we change the situation. We change the situation by standing up on the issue. So thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Okay. We've been at it now for 1 hour and 35 minutes. We've got another one. Come up, mate. I appreciate everyone kind of hanging in there with it. Who have we got here?
Warren Pitts, Ben.
Warren.
Warren Pitts. From
Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to do that.
Oh, COVID bumps.
That's it.
That's it. We're on camera after all.
That's it.
Okay, Warren.
Okay.
Let us have it.
Well, I'm a small business owner, family business. We've been on the airport 30 odd years. We've got CASA approval for manufacturing and maintenance, and we make things and we keep aeroplanes going. And not just here, but it goes all over Australia. And part of the aerospace industry, and there's two other companies which are not here tonight, also from the aerospace industry, and they're doing development for the pointy end of aerospace for the future. And we've, and we all help one another out. And so I'm here because we need help. And the uncertain future, where's it going to end? Because they haven't told us where we got a building. They said, sometime after Christmas next year, they'll come back and revisit. They've told us the building's going. We own the building. We've invested in it. And
that's it's your superannuation, isn't it? I mean, when you build a building, you build bricks and mortar.
We thought it was
an expectation you'll have the opportunity at some point in time to sell the lease and the building to some other entrepreneur that wants to come in and have their go.
Yep.
And so when they take the building away, you lose all of that superannuation that you need to rely on to retire as well.
Well, there's just a lot of knowledge and heritage in our little building in certain areas, and the industry needs that. They need cliquey little groups that can support it and keep it going. And
I'll just roll back to something you said there in the beginning. You're saying that you work aerospace business working at the pointy end.
Yeah,
it's one of the things that I picked up in that master plan actually, and it's one of the things that I'll be raising with infrastructure. Is it's completely devoid of any recognition that aviation is changing, and that there are emerging technologies that go beyond just electric aeroplanes, and that they're going to be big parts of our modern economy. The modern air taxi. I kind of, when everyone heard Uber announce that they're going to run their trials, I was like a lot of other people, I just poo-pooed it and went, oh God, because CASA were in there saying we're a forward-looking organisation and we have a track record of innovating on regulation and safety, and I nearly scoffed that coffee cleanup. And I thought, wow, good luck Uber. But the realities are these are very determined big companies, and just like the Elon Musks of the world, they will forcibly change society by doing things that we probably would have looked at 5 years ago and gone, oh no, it's impossible. And so, wouldn't it be great if Morrabbin could be sharing in that? Wouldn't it be great if the airport actually had a vision that saw all of that aerospace and engineering and high technology as part of its future, and yet the master plan really doesn't seem to address any of it?
no, it's a shame. But where do we go from here? It's just uncertain. And at the end of the day, we might just have to close the door and walk away.
How many people,
And
if
then-
you close your doors tomorrow, how many people are walking out without work?
Well, there's my wife and my son, and we employ another person part-time. So there's 4 of us.
All of you out of work if you have to shut your doors.
Yeah, but there's a lot lost as well, because in our inventory of drawings, we've literally got, manufacturing drawings, there'd be probably 100 of those. And repair schemes for different things, there's probably 100 or more of those. So where does all that go? It's all been developed, drawn.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation. I know Ken Canane from AMR OVA. I've been doing a fair bit of work with Ken over the last couple of years, and sitting in meetings with Ken of recent with infrastructure, talking about some of the challenges facing the MROs. And I guess, I don't come from an engineering background, so a lot of it tends to be new, and I love going to the meetings because I'm always wanting to learn. That's how you become a good advocate. You've got to really get into the middle of it all and understand it. And I was shocked to learn of, not only are you facing challenges at the airport level trying to deal with airport organisations like this mob, but the complexities that your businesses are facing in trying to deal with a regulatory system that in many cases have your hands tied. And I was shocked on a very basic thing that I didn't know was a problem, and that was that we didn't have the bilateral agreements in place that allowed many of the engineering orders and the approaches that we take locally. We couldn't export them. They wouldn't be recognised by Europe, and they wouldn't be recognised by the United States, and that it had been a situation that had been dragging on for 30 years. And I remember sitting there with this guy from infrastructure who was, oh yes, we were aware of that in 2001, and yeah, we did a thing in 2006 and later in 2010. And I got to the end of the meeting, I said, at what point after 20 or 30 years do you ask yourself, why haven't we got this done? Oh, well, it's very complex. I'm like, it's not really. It's just such a failure. And it's what, people often say to me, Ben, why is your nose out of joint on these issues so much? And I think the hard thing for me to understand with it is it's just such a wholesale failure. It's not a failure just of airports. It's not just a failure of regulation. It's a failure of just about every support mechanism that's supposed to be there for you to be able to drive and create a business and build success and employ people. The whole foundation is just rotten. And so, it really does need to be fixed. There needs to be more done in this space. And I think, more awareness, we need to be raising that profile, speaking up. And, I'd ask you the same questions. If we can create an opportunity to bring representatives from Moorabbin to Canberra, would you come up to Canberra and sit before government and speak to them and give them an honest appraisal?
If need be. If it'll help save us here, yes.
Well, I think we've got a pretty clear and common message from just about everyone here, which is, I think people want to get this message out. And so we're going to try and fight as hard as we can to make that happen.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Cheers.
Just a couple of points, Ben.
Yeah, jump up and stand. Stan Vanderweel. No stranger to controversy is he.
Always ready for a fight.
I first met Stan many years ago when I had a gentleman contact me one day. I just started Aviation Advertiser, and I got this phone call one day from a guy called Paul Phelan. And he phoned me up and he said, "Who the hell are you?" Who is this guy? But he said to me, "Who are you?" He said, "You've been writing these letters on airport privatisation." He said, "You kind of know your subject, but you really don't know English." I'm like, okay, Paul. Well, Paul ended up working with me for a number of years, and it was really working with Paul is where I discovered all of these issues were going on, and it kind of lit a real interest. And obviously working with Paul was working with you, Stan, so I'm very familiar with some of your issues.
6 or 7 years, something like that. But
I'll put the camera on. Stan, it's all yours.
just the point you were discussing before, in terms of these projects are taking 20 years and so forth, it's a case of bureaucratic work creation.
Yeah.
You've got to create the jobs. Otherwise, there's no bureaucrats to get their high
I've often
salaries.
wondered, Stan, how organisations like CASA and the Department of Infrastructure and these government bodies responsible for our industry have grown, and yet we've contracted. It's kind of like, as we contract, do they need more jobs to manage the fewer people that remain? Is it that we've become so rowdy as a small group that we're uncontrollable, or is it that they've created such a complex system now that they can't even control it themselves?
The last bit here, the complex system, over complex. Yeah, probably on the CASA angle, that's quite a definite thing. But on the airport issue, what I wanted to bring up is the fact that I attended a function here at Moorabbin Airport on the day of the handing over of the keys to the airport. And at that function, the airport manager actually mentioned to a few of us, he said, we've only got to keep one runway open. That's all the commitment of the whole thing. So right from the day one, that was the plan, or is the plan. And they're slowly sort of creeping up and, taking over the place. On these hangars, the Bellman hangars actually are pre-war, and they were constructed in Deniliquin and a few other places in southern New South Wales for the military, and then dismantled and brought to Moorabbin Airport and other airports. So there's a long history there. It's even a heritage item, really, that could be tackled.
Well, that's one of the issues at Bankstown right now, is they have a chevron of hangars, and I'm led to believe that they've managed to convince the government that there's no heritage value in all the World War II structures, and they actually now have been given quiet approval. They can tear all the World War II structures down.
Yeah.
I mean, if they achieve that goal and they remove the Bellmans and they remove all the old engine change-out hangars and all the ammunition buildings, I mean, then the entire World War II history of Bankstown Airport has been lost.
Yeah.
And it's a story that's replicated. We see it all the time. Hangars are disappearing off sites, and they'll use the excuse of saying the buildings no longer meet the building code. And I kind of laugh with that, because if you take the structure out of the building and you take the cladding off the building, what have you got? You have a frame. So as long as it gets reclad properly, and as long as the structure's within them, then yes, they can be brought up to code. But for some reason, they just do not want the old structures. They want them gone.
Yeah, well, there's certainly solid steel frames. So they could withstand, or they've withstood a lot of weather, a lot of winds and so forth.
You obviously have a great deal of experience in business, Stan. You and I have had plenty of conversations around your adventures with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority.
They're still ongoing.
They're still ongoing. But on the issue of the master plan, on the issue of privatisation, if you had the Deputy Prime Minister with you right now, what would you be saying to him?
Yeah, put a stop to it all, and actually revert to possibly selling the land that they've occupied already to them, and say, well, okay, we want a proper value for it. They bought the airport, or the lease, 99-year lease, for 30 cents per square metre. That's all they paid.
And the valuation at the time, Stan, was based on the fact, though, that the intent was that this was never going to be a medium to high density commercial industrial operation. This was an airport, and airports are actually not high density. And that is something that I think has genuinely been lost, is that the valuation was set based on that. And if the valuation had been set on a high density development, it would have had a completely different valuation. So that I think that's a point that does need to be raised. It needs to be queried with some strength, because it really set the tone, which seems to have disappeared, because now we're, with the structures that are on the airport, these are high density commercial industrial sites.
Oh, definitely, yes. But I was part of a group, or a small syndicate that was going to buy the airport, or put a bid in for the airport. It was $4.5 million we came up with. And we were told at a meeting, which was attended by the people who ended up getting the lease as well, that we could only do very small amount of development. And so that restricted it. We were aware, or we were told, that there was a floodplain on the eastern side of the airport, so quite a large portion. And it's not unusual to have quite a bit of water running through the storm water drains at the airport here, and it doesn't take much. So our bid was based on that. The actual sale that took place was $8.3 million. And from day one, they just started their development contrary to what they'd told.
8.3 million down. How many 100 million already in the bank?
Mm.
You've got to, it's a real, there's no equity in that arrangement, is there? And yet the taxpayer, we're the ones that lost out. And the government often looks at these issues of privatisation and they talk these big, sentences about we'll divest in this and we'll divest of that. But what they're actually saying is we're going to sell off what you own. Effectively selling off what we own. And we work very hard as a community to be able to have these types of infrastructure assets. It's just such a crying shame that we're in that situation, considering the fact that we own them.
Yep, exactly.
Obviously, mate, a situation needs to change. Do you hold any hope? Do you think it will change, or do you think that this minister is going to sign off this master plan?
No, if we look at all the inquiries we've had in different other sectors, the aged care, you name them, there's plenty of them. The corruption that's surfacing on all fronts, and particularly the bureaucratic side of things, that I don't think there's much hope.
I might put a link to it. I read a fantastic article on Crikey, the news website, crikey.com.au, and the headline of the article read something along the lines of Australians need to wake up to the perverse depth of soft corruption that now is going on right across all tiers of government.
Yeah.
And the fact that soft corruption has virtually been so normalised that now it's okay. And it gave a great example of the pork barrelling that went on at the last election, and obviously a lot of the deals that were done, and we're now learning that many of those deals went against parliamentary guidelines and all the rest of it, but nothing's come of it. There's been no one held to account for it. It's just been, they were pork barrelling, so it's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a bit of that's gone on across aviation that needs to be brought about. So maybe not unless we get a federal commission against corruption will we be able to necessarily change some of those items.
How many years would that take?
That's it.
To run, I mean.
Well, look, Stan, I'd love to sit and talk forever, but we're absolutely out of time. We're right on the 7:30 cut-off, and I do appreciate
thanks for the
you
opportunity, and thanks for coming
along. And you and I are going to be having many conversations anyway.
We'll continue.
For everyone that's joined us this evening, I notice we've had quite a few people have joined in throughout the night. I really do thank you. These panel discussions are a great opportunity to gain some real insight into the views and the opinions of real people right across the aviation industry. Not just the views of AOPA as an organisation or others, but to hear from people who have businesses, people who've been building their superannuations, people who've been throwing themselves behind this industry and have been creating the jobs and the economic thrust of aviation. So we're going to be doing a few more of these. And Sean, I thank you very much for coming along. And it's great to be here at Moorabbin and to come down and do this. This is the first time we've ever done a remote AOPA live, which is kind of an interesting experience. We probably need some better equipment. Sean, we need more members. We need to get more people joining AOPA so we can get some new equipment, but that'd be great. And David, thank you very much for coming down and supporting. And of course, having your own situation take place out at Druin and needing to get that resolved as well. And
couldn't possibly be any corruption down there.
Cheating. Anyway, guys, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back to everyone again next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. And so on behalf of AOPA, I say thank you and good night.